I remember all the struggles I had, not only in school, but my behaviors, but the things I did, the wild tantrums I had when I was a kid. It was like a force would come in me, and I would throw myself on the floor and have like these wild fits and break up furniture. I broke all my toys. Every time I got a new toy, within a few weeks it was broken. Everything I did had a self-destructive, death wish type behavior pattern to it. And of course, no one could ever understand why. School officials, when I was in public school, they told my parents, listen, you got a problem child here. I don't know what their exact words were, but they met with them in private and said, listen, you have to take your child to a child psychologist. If you want your child to finish school and stay in this public school, Mr. and Mrs. Berkowitz, you have to try to get them help. So they made arrangements for me to see a child psychologist, and for 2 years, every Saturday afternoon, I hated it, on my day off from school, my mom had to take me to Manhattan to talk to a child psychologist by the name of Mrs. Sosnoff. Well, an elderly lady who was a nice lady, but of course she's no longer alive. And I remember going there. The sessions lasted about an hour every Saturday during school year, and to try to iron out, what was causing me all the problems. And of course, nothing was ever accomplished, nothing was ever done. But it's satisfied the school officials that, okay, they're making an effort. And in the end, eventually I managed to finish public school, 6th grade, went into 7th grade, in junior high school and on to high school. And it really was my dad. I had so many learning disabilities because I couldn't focus or concentrate. In school, I just couldn't, I managed to hang in there, but I was truant a lot because I couldn't stand sitting in that classroom. And when I was in high school, I was truant a lot because by that time my adoptive mother had died, and my dad was at work all the time. So I was a latchkey kid. I had my own keys, and I was 13, 14, managing on my own. And anyway, it was a struggle. And I look back, it says, all the times I had periods of tremendous depression, all the times I would think of killing myself, and there were times I would look out the window. We lived on the 6th floor, and from my window I could see for miles and miles. It was really a great place to live in this part of the Bronx. And I could never understand why I was so like that. It wasn't until years later when I finally understood, that's it. It was like a time of enlightenment, which just the light went off, and I began to, as I grew older and reflected on things, I lived with false guilt. I was punishing myself, and all my behavior patterns, my self-destructive and self-sabotaging behavior patterns were because I thought that I had somehow done something wrong and caused my mother to die while giving birth to me. So I grew up with this tremendous sense of guilt that the woman who brought me into the world, somehow I caused her to die. Because that's a tremendous traumatic thing for a child to be told at the age of 4 or 5, hey, your mom died while giving birth to you. Now my parents, later on, I spoke to my dad about it, and we talked, and I'm just kind of going through things very quickly now, but we talked about it, and my parents, my adoptive parents, meant well. That's what the experts told them to say to a child. Adoption was common back then when kids are born out of wedlock, and when you're ever going to talk to your child about adoption, they're going to obviously have questions. The standard answer was, your mom died while giving birth. These so-called experts never thought of the guilt that they would lay up on an individual by telling them something like that. And I had no conception of what was going on. So little did I know everything, all the reckless things. I was so accident prone. I tripped over everything. I crashed into everything. I fell down steps. I rode my bike off the curb. I did all kinds of stuff. And it never dawned on me, this was like a suicide wish. This was a death wish in action. My life was one big death wish. And I had many good times growing up, and a lot of times, with friends and everything, but there was always that demon of guilt hanging over me, crushing my spirit, oppressing me, causing me to do things that I'd always get in trouble. Just when I started to do good in school, I'd find some reason to mess up. Just when I was behaving, I'd get into a fight with another kid in the block. Anything to mess myself up. And I wasn't doing this consciously, but it was a sense of I have to punish myself. I didn't consciously think that, but this was going on in my subconscious. I don't deserve to live. I don't deserve to live. This is, my life is, you know, I just always putting myself in predicaments where, and this was like to assuage my guilt, which I didn't even know I had, but that was a part of my life. That was such a big part of my life. And so anyway, that was, I believe, you know, that spiritually speaking, that this type of, the things that I experienced, the rejection and the confusion and the misinformation opened the door to the entry of like demonic control in my life. Because as a child, I did a lot of weird things. I craved the darkness. I used to crawl under my bed sometimes for hours hiding in the dark. I used to tunnel my way into the closet, one of the clothing closets, and just hide there. My mom used to think I was outside playing, and I'd be just in the dark. And I, you know, all my suicidal thoughts, all my wishes to die, thinking about death. Now I understand that this was probably all clustered around that. Well, years later, after I got out of the Army, I found out that there was an organization called ALMA, Adoptees Liberty Movement Association. And anyway, they help people to try to that have been adopted to try to locate their parents or their families, and vice versa. They help those who put children up for adoption, and years later want to find out how those kids are doing. They also, so it was a very interesting group, and I went to some of their meetings, and I remember going there the first time we met in Manhattan. And I just have to go through this quickly. I wish I could explain it in more detail, but there's time limitations. Nevertheless, I joined this group, and after I got out of the Army, because I was searching for my roots. By this time, my dad had moved to Florida, and although I had aunts and uncles in other places out in Long Island, I never saw them very much. So I was pretty much on my own, and working as a security guard and just trying to make ends meet, going to college on the GI Bill, because I was an Army veteran at this time, having finished 3 years in the Army and being honorably discharged. Anyway, I started to look up at the advice of these people how to find my original birth certificate, which was sealed by the court. And they found out a way to do that. And when I came across in the records in Manhattan, in New York City, the Office of Bureau of Births and Deaths, this big building. I went through there searching like a detective, and finally I found the name David Richard Falco. And when I looked at that name, I was about maybe 22 at the time, 21, I said, wait a minute, that's not a Jewish name, David Richard Falco. I mean, it should be Richard David Falco. I said, that's not a Jewish name. So I told my dad about it. I called my dad in Florida. I said, Dad, listen. I explained what happened. I says, I want to know the truth. What am I doing with the name Richard David Falco that's not a Jewish name? Who am I? And my dad, who was very nice, my dad and I had a good relationship. He told me, he says, David, here's what happened. You were born out of wedlock, and you know that was hidden at the time, and he sent me the original birth certificate. He kept it in a safe deposit box all those years. So he sent me the original birth certificate, and when I saw the name Falco, I was able to begin my search when I found out my mother was alive. See, originally I was going to think about maybe trying to find my dad, but I didn't, because I didn't think my mother was alive. Then I found out she never died after all. That was that was a lie. You know, they meant well, but that was a lie. And so anyway, I found her, and it's a long story how that happened, and we had a beautiful, beautiful meeting. Unfortunately, the media turned that around to make it, and people in the media have said, oh, it was a terrible reunion, we didn't get along. Nothing could be further than the truth. We had a love for one another. This was my mom, Betty, I'm talking about my birth mother, you know, having met her for the first time when I was about, 21, 22, and finding out I had a half-sister too named Rosalind. I said, and she had nieces and her husband, and I suddenly had a family. This was the most beautiful thing. These were the sweetest people. My mom was the sweetest lady. She was so apologetic. She said, listen, you know, I was just struggling. And I said, hey, that's okay. She told me the whole story. This is how I know about Joe and the struggles she had, you know, carrying me and things like that. But I turned out, you know, everything turned out to be okay. The crimes that happened later had nothing whatsoever to do with her. This was just psychologists and college professors and all these so-called experts putting their opinions into things and making things seem like this way when they really were not.